Aisha Thompson woke before the sky had even begun to lighten. She slipped quietly out of bed, careful not to wake her roommate, and pulled on her navy blue scrubs. The fabric felt familiar against her skin, like an old friend greeting her after a long day. In the small kitchen of her city apartment, she measured out instant coffee into a chipped white mug and added just enough creamer to dull the bitter taste. The first sip warmed her from the inside out, and she closed her eyes, breathing in the soft promise of a new day. Every morning she thought of her grandmother. Growing up in a dusty town far from here, Aisha spent hours sitting on her grandmother's porch, listening to stories about neighbors in need. Her grandmother had been the village healer, mixing herbs and bandages and hope. As a little girl, Aisha had watched her tend to every cut and cough with gentle hands. When her grandmother passed away, Aisha carried that image into every step of her life. Nursing was not just a job to her, it was her heritage, her purpose. By 6:30, Aisha was on the bus, heading toward Riverside Community Hospital. The streetlights still glowed orange against the dark sky. She counted her stops, watched other early commuters, and rehearsed her plan for the day. She needed to check on Mr. Walter Green, a patient in room 312, before the rest of her ward rounds began. Walter was quiet and polite, but he worried his daughter with small coughs and restless nights. Aisha felt a special tug in her heart for him. He reminded her of her own grandfather, whose laughter had once filled their home. At the hospital entrance, she swiped her badge and nodded to the security guard, a friendly man named Rob. "Morning, Nurse Thompson," he said with a tired smile. "Another busy day?" "Always," she answered, returning his smile. The lobby was still half asleep, chairs empty, vending machines humming softly. She moved through the hallway with confidence, her steps light but determined. The cold tile under her shoes made her feel awake. She reached the nurse's station and sank into her chair. Around her, monitors beeped, phones rang, and a few night shift nurses finished their reports. She opened Walter's chart, scanning his vitals. Blood pressure slightly high, oxygen level good, temperature steady, nothing alarming. Still, she made a note to adjust his pillow for comfort and remind him to do his breathing exercises. A routine morning, she thought. She could handle dozens of these every day. Outside the window, dawn broke in pale pinks and blues. Aisha watched the colors spread across the sky. She felt a calm settle in her chest. This hospital was not the grandest, but its halls held stories of hope and healing. She remembered the woman who walked out of these doors last week after a long fight with pneumonia, waving to the staff with tears of gratitude. Those moments gave her strength. She sipped her coffee again, eyes on Walter's chart, unaware of the alarm that would soon sound. She double-checked her schedule. Rounds in the geriatric ward at 7. Medication passes at 8. A quick break before the morning briefing. Then she saw Mrs. Patel, the supervisor, standing at the end of the HS station talking quietly to another nurse. Aisha straightened her back, ready to face whatever instructions came her way. She arranged her pens, pulled her hair back into a neat ponytail, and tapped her badge against her hip. At 7, she would enter room 312 and greet Walter with gentle words. She would adjust his blankets and ask about his aches. She would remind him of the bright weekend visit his daughter planned. She had done it all before so many times that her actions felt automatic. But in that moment, as steam curled above her mug and the sky brightened, she felt only peace. She did not know that this morning would challenge her calm, or that her choices in the next few minutes would test everything she believed in. Aisha felt the sudden alarm like a jolt to her heart. One moment she was straightening Walter's blanket, reminding him to take deep breaths, and the next, the red light above his door flashed. A loud beep echoed down the hallway. Her breath caught. She dropped the clipboard and raced toward room 312. Other nurses followed, voices low but urgent, and Aisha's mind sharpened. She pushed past the curtain and found Walter slumped against his pillows, his face pale and sweaty, fingers clutched to his chest. "Mr. Green?" She called softly but firmly. He did not respond. His breathing was shallow, almost a whisper. Of air? Aisha checked his pulse at the wrist. It was weak and irregular. She placed her stethoscope over his chest and heard a faint thud, not the steady rhythm she expected. Her training kicked in. She pressed the emergency button on the wall, and a mechanical voice announced Code Blue, Room 312. Time slowed, and everything she had learned flashed before her. Airway clearance, chest compressions, oxygen delivery. Aisha crouched beside Walter. She cleared his airway gently, tilting his head and lifting his chin, then delivered 2 slow breaths through a bag valve mask connected to an oxygen tank. She felt his chest rise and fall, but the pulse was still faint. She began chest compressions, pushing down hard and fast in the center of his chest, counting silently to herself, 1, 2, 3. Her arms burned, but she did not stop. She kept her back straight and legs firm, using her whole body weight. Each compression was a promise. I will not give up. She looked into Walter's face, her eyes calm and steady, as if she was holding his hand, even though they were miles apart in that moment of crisis. Within seconds, 2 more nurses arrived with a crash cart. One placed defibrillator pads on Walter's chest. Aisha kept compressing while another nurse operated the machine. The monitor showed a flat line. The lead nurse called out, "Charge to 200 joules." Aisha paused compressions for a single second as the machine charged. Then the lead nurse pressed the button, and a thump echoed through the room. Walter's body jolted. Aisha resumed compressions. Immediately, without looking away, she whispered, "Come on, Mr. Green. Stay with us." The beep returned, and miraculously, a shaky heartbeat appeared on the screen. The team took turns compressions every 2 minutes to avoid exhaustion. Aisha stepped back for a breath of air, her chest heaving, eyes bright with focus. She applied more oxygen and drew blood for tests. She inserted an IV line in his arm, anticipating medications the doctor would order. Through her calm actions, each step followed the protocol she knew so well. But in her heart she hoped for one simple thing, that Walter would breathe normally again. After several agonizing minutes, Walter's color began to return. His brow lost some of its clamminess, and his lips, once gray, turned a faint shade of pink. His pulse grew stronger and he moaned softly. Aisha held his hand. "You're safe now, Mr. Green," she said, her voice soft. "Help is here." He blinked once, confusion and relief mingling in his eyes. He tried to speak but only managed to whisper. Aisha smiled gently, squeezing his hand. "Just rest, you're going to be all right." The hospital room hummed with energy. The doctor arrived and nodded to the team. "Great work," he said, checking the monitor. He gave an order for nitroglycerin and aspirin and adjusted Walter's medications. Aisha prepared the drugs, explaining each one to him. "This will help your heart. You did the hard part by holding on." She watched as his breathing eased. The machine settled into a steady rhythm. Visitors outside the room paused in the hallway to see if they could catch a glimpse of movement through the frosted glass. Once the immediate danger passed, Aisha stepped outside the room to catch her breath. Her scrubs clung to her back, damp with sweat. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from the rush of adrenaline fading away. A fellow nurse rested a hand on her shoulder. "You were amazing," she said. Aisha managed a small smile and nodded. "It was teamwork," she replied, trying to sound humble, even though pride warmed her chest. In that moment, the corridor seemed flooded with soft light, as if the whole hospital celebrated Walter's survival. Word spread quickly through the ward. Colleagues peeked around corners to see if Walter was awake. Mrs. Patel, the supervisor, appeared at the nurse's station, face serious. Aisha straightened her posture, expecting praise, or at least a nod of approval. Instead, Mrs. Patel asked for a report. "Did you follow code procedure exactly?" Aisha took a breath and recounted every step how she checked his airway, started compressions, assisted with the defibrillator, and administered the oxygen. Her voice was steady and honest, but Mrs. Patel's expression remained unreadable. She asked questions about timing, protocols, and approvals. Aisha answered each without hesitation. She had not meant to skip any step or overstep any boundary. She had only done what was necessary to save a life. Still, Mrs. Patel scribbled. Notes in her pad. Aisha watched, heart fluttering. She had always believed that saving a life was the highest honor a nurse could have. Now she wondered if rules mattered more than breathing hearts. Meanwhile, in room 312, Walter lay with his eyes closed. Aisha slipped back in quietly, wanting to make sure he was comfortable. She fluffed his pillow and placed a cool cloth on his forehead. He stirred and opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. He tried to speak, and she leaned close. "You saved me," he whispered, voice weak, but clear. Aisha shook her head. "No, Mr. Green. We saved you together." He nodded, relief and gratitude shining in his eyes. She gave him a gentle smile and rubbed his hand. As she left the room, Aisha felt a mix of triumph and unease. She had done her duty, but something in the supervisor's notes weighed on her. In the break room later, she replayed the morning in, her mind wondering if her actions would be questioned. Yet she held on to that moment when Walter opened his eyes. She remembered his shaky whisper of thanks. It was that connection, the spark of life after the darkness, that kept her going. By mid-morning, the scene had quieted. Walter was stable, and the code team had moved on to their next emergency. Aisha returned to the nurse's station, where Mrs. Patel tapped her on the shoulder. "Your report will go to the review board," she said curtly. Aisha nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I understand," she replied. She gathered her chart and went back to her duties, placing one patient's comfort before another. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just happened. When her shift ended, she walked out into the bright sun, the warmth on her face both healing and unsettling. She thought of Walter, lying safe inside those hospital walls because of her quick actions. She thought of her grandmother, who had taught her that healing was a gift, not a rule. And she thought of the days ahead, hoping that saving a life would not cost her her own job. Yet she held her head high. She had faced death and won. Her heart ached with pride, fear, and a fierce determination to stand by her calling, no matter the cost. Aisha returned to her station after lunch, the midday sun painting the hallway in warm gold. She felt the weight of the day settle on her shoulders, but she still carried the quiet pride of saving Mr. Green's life. She organized charts and administered medicines, offering gentle smiles to patients as she passed. Yet beneath her calm exterior, her thoughts drifted back to that tense moment with Mrs. Patel. The supervisor's promise that her report would go to a review board echoed. In Aisha's mind, what did that mean? At 2 o'clock, a message arrived on her phone. Human Resources wanted to see her in 15 minutes. Aisha's heart sank. She had never been called to HR before. She finished giving a dose of blood pressure medicine, too. An elderly man then washed her hands and took a steadying breath. "Just a meeting," she whispered to herself. "You're not in trouble?" But fear fluttered in her chest. She walked through the corridor, blue scrubs rustling, toward the HR office near the hospital entrance. The receptionist gave her a polite nod, and Aisha sat in a hardback chair. The walls were pale green in attempt at command family. Photos hung above the desk, yet the quiet felt heavy. After a moment, 2 women entered, one in a crisp suit with a badge, announcing her as HR director, and Mrs. Patel, arms crossed, expression serious. "Thank you for coming, Nurse Thompson." The HR director said, voice polite but firm, "Please have a seat." Aisha settled into a second chair across from them. Her hands lay folded in her lap. She kept her back straight, eyes on the HR director. "We're here to discuss the incident this morning involving Mr. Green," the director continued. "It's our duty to review any situation where protocol may not have been followed." Aisha's throat felt dry. She managed a small nod. "I understand," she said softly. "I just did what I thought was right."
Oh.
Mrs. Patel glanced at the HR director. The director opened a thick file on her desk. Aisha's name was printed. On the cover, she felt her pulse quicken. The director spoke slowly, reading from the report. "It appears that you initiated advanced life support without obtaining necessary authorization from a supervising physician,
What?
and without documenting certain steps in the patient record prior to action." Aisha's chest tightened. She had documented her steps the moment she could, and she had acted on her training. But she held her tongue and listened. The director continued, "Under hospital policy, any code blue event must be declared by the code team leader or an attending physician. While your efforts saved Mr. Green, we cannot ignore these policy violations." Aisha's heart pounded. She opened her mouth to explain, but Mrs. Patel spoke first. "Nurse Thompson," Patel said, voice cold, "we appreciate your dedication. But rules exist to protect patients and staff. You acted too soon without proper chain of command." Aisha's mind raced. During a cardiac arrest, every second counts. She had no time to wait for approval. That moment between life and death was too fragile for paperwork. Yet here she sat, accused of wrongdoing. The HR director looked from Patel to Aisha. "We have made our decision. Your employment with Riverside Community Hospital is terminated, effective immediately." The words hit Aisha like a blow. Terminated. Fired. She felt her world tilt. Her breath caught and her vision blurred. She clutched the edge of the chair. "There must be a mistake," she whispered. I saved his life." The director's face was firm. "I'm sorry. The decision is final." Aisha could feel tears pressing at the corners of her eyes. She fought to keep them back. She stood slowly, legs shaky, and gathered her small satchel. Mrs. Patel rose too, handing Aisha a folder containing termination papers, final paycheck details, and benefits information. "Human Resources will help you with unemployment paperwork." The director added, "We wish you the best." Aisha nodded numbly, unable to speak. She turned and walked out, each step feeling heavier than the last. In the hallway, the hospital's usual bustle seemed to fade away. Patients and visitors milled about, oblivious to her loss. A janitor passed by with a mop, smiling at her. She forced a small wave, heart pounding. She felt exposed, as if her vulnerability showed in every movement. She reached the locker room and closed herself inside a tiny stall. She sank onto the bench and let tears fall freely. She pressed her face into her hands, grief and anger mingling. How could a place built on saving lives punish the very person who saved one? Memories flashed into her mind, her grandmother's gentle hands, smoothing a fevered child's forehead. The way her grandmother whispered, "Do what your heart tells. You is right." She remembered her first day of nursing school. Dread and excitement swirling in her chest, and her proud grandmother's smile. She thought of her parents' sacrifices, sending her to university so she could become a nurse. All that history, all that love, felt suddenly fragile. After a long moment, she wiped her face and stood. She opened the locker, took off her scrub top and pants, and folded them carefully. She placed them in a plastic bag. She unpinned her badge and set it on the bench. That badge had been more than an ID, it was a symbol of trust. Now it was just metal and plastic. She slid it into the folder with the termination papers. Walked to the break room to collect the few personal items she kept there. A framed photo of her grandmother. A thermos decorated with a painted flower, and a small notebook where she jotted patient notes and poems. A co-worker, Maria, peeked in. Maria's eyes widened when she saw Aisha's face. "They fired you?" she asked in a hushed voice. K nodded, tears still shining. Maria crossed the room and hugged her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Aisha managed a shaky smile through tears. "Thank you." Maria's voice cracked. That's impossible. You saved Mr. Green's life." Aisha closed her eyes. "That's what I thought." She placed the photo and notebook into her bag and hugged Maria again. Other colleagues drifted in, offering quiet words of support. None stayed long, fearing they might be next. Aisha read their worry in their eyes, and her heart cracked anew. She stood in the nearly empty break room, gathering her courage. She put on her coat and adjusted her scarf. Then she stepped out and walked down the corridor one last time, each step echoing in her ears. She passed room 312, where she had fought to bring Mr. Green back. The door was closed. She pressed her hand to the frame, remembering his shaky eyes. "You're going to be okay," she had told him. She still believed that. Outside the hospital, the afternoon air felt cool. She breathed deeply and gathered her bag. Her phone buzzed. A text from Walter's daughter, Claire. It read, "Thank you for saving him. I can't believe they fired you. Please call me." Aisha's throat tightened. She typed a brief reply. "I'll call you soon." She turned and walked to her car, feeling the weight of each moment. She sat inside and shut the door. She stared at the steering wheel, trying to summon strength. She drove home in silence. The city streets were busy with traffic, but she felt alone. She replayed conversations in her mind, questions she wished she had asked, words she wished she had said. She thought of her own heart, how it beat with respect for life, and how a hospital policy had punished her for listening to that beat. Yet she also felt something else rising, a spark of determination. She had a choice. She could accept defeat, or she could find another way to use her gift. When she reached home, she unlocked her door and stepped inside. The apartment was quiet but familiar. She placed her bag on the table and sank onto the sofa. Her grandmother's framed photo leaned against a pillow. Aisha reached out and touched the glass. She whispered, "Grandma, what should I do?" The silence answered her. In that moment, Aisha realized that her story was not over. She had lost her job, but she had not lost her purpose. And with that thought, she sat up straighter, ready to face whatever came next. ChatGPT said, "The news of Aisha's firing spread faster than she could have imagined." Late that afternoon, a buzz erupted on social media when Claire Green, Walter's daughter, posted a short message under a photo of her father's hand wrapped. Gently around Aisha's, she wrote, "My father owes his life to Nurse Aisha Thompson. They fired her for saving him. Please help us bring her back." The post went live from her hospital bed, and within minutes, friends and strangers alike began sharing it. Comments poured in. "This is heartbreaking. Riverside must be held accountable. And I can't believe they'd fire a hero." By evening, the tiny local news outlet, City Beat, picked up the story. Their reporter, Marcus Lee, arrived at Aisha's apartment building just as she was unlocking her door. He asked for a quick interview on camera, but Aisha politely declined. Explaining that she needed time to process everything, Marcus understood and promised to respect her space, but he left with a tape recorder running. That night, City Beat ran a short segment on their website, "Beloved Nurse Silenced: Community Rallies for Aisha Thompson," complete with Claire's original social media post and a statement from the hospital saying they were reviewing the case. The story's headlines sparked outrage among viewers, and the video clip was shared on other platforms. Within 24 hours, a Change.org petition appeared, demanding Riverside Community Hospital reinstate Aisha immediately. The petition's title read, "Rehire Nurse Aisha Thompson Hero Who Saved Walter Green. Donations to an Emergency." Funds started trickling in, and by the next morning, several community leaders had put their names behind it. The pastor of St. Mary's Church, the head of the local nursing association, and even a city council member. Comments on the petition spoke of Aisha's kindness, her calm under pressure, and the injustice of punishing someone for doing her duty. Meanwhile, Aisha sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of tea growing cold in front of her. She scrolled through the petition and read message after message from people she had never met. "I was a patient here last year. Aisha was the only one who listened to me. My aunt's life was saved by her steady hands." Each story warmed her heart and reminded her why she chose nursing. She felt tears of gratitude slip down her cheeks. For the first time since getting fired, she smiled. Claire called Aisha that morning. "Thank you," she said, voice wavering with emotion. "I don't know how to fix this, but I promise I'll do everything I can." Aisha's voice shook as she replied, "Just focus on your father's recovery. I appreciate you more than you know." They arranged to meet later that afternoon at the hospital garden, a quiet courtyard where patients sometimes sat in the sun to rest. Back at Riverside, the board of directors gathered for an emergency meeting. The petition had reached 5,000 signatures, and local media coverage amplified public pressure. Hospital executives had not expected such a storm. They reviewed the case file, Aisha's termination letter, Mrs. Patel's notes, and Claire's post. Some board members argued that strict policy enforcement maintained order. Others worried that losing public trust would harm the hospitals. reputation, and funding. A decision was looming. That afternoon, Aisha took a deep breath as she walked through the hospital's glass doors, escorted by Claire and her husband Mark. Security officers paused as she passed, recognizing her but unsure whether to stop her. Claire whispered, "We'll be safe." They found a bench under a maple tree in the garden. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the stone path. Walter, now alert and stable, sat in a wheelchair beside them. His face brightened when he saw Aisha approaching. He reached out a trembling hand. Aisha knelt beside him. "Hello, Mr. Green," she said softly. He smiled, his eyes misting. "I owe you my life," he whispered. Aisha shook her head. "You did all the hard work by holding on." Claire looked on, tears of relief in her eyes. Journalists gathered. Nearby, cameras perched on tripods. Headlines scrolled on their laptops. Nurse meets patient after firing. Community hero returns for reunion. Aisha's heart fluttered. She felt exposed but also supported. She realized that her story had become bigger than herself. It had become about fairness, compassion, and what it meant to serve others. As Aisha settled onto the bench, several nurses whom she did not know approached quietly. One placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We're all behind you," she said. Another offered cupcakes wrapped in cellophane. Soon more staff joined, some in scrubs, others in uniform. Aisha looked around, surprised by their courage. They nodded and whispered words of encouragement before slipping away. Afraid to be seen defying hospital policy themselves, but still wanting her to know she was not alone. Inside, the hospital corridors hummed with activity, but word of the gathering spread. Patients peeked out of their rooms. Cleaned-up-looking volunteers hovered nearby. And even a few doctors paused in the hall to offer nods of support. It felt as if the entire hospital had paused to witness Aisha's quiet stand for justice. Later that day, the hospital's chief medical officer, Dr. Simmons, approached Claire and Aisha in the garden. He carried a thick envelope. His face was solemn but respectful. "Miss Thompson," he began, "the board has reconsidered your case." Aisha's heart thudded. Claire gripped her hand. Dr. Simmons took a deep breath. "They have decided to offer you reinstatement as a senior nurse, with full back pay and a formal apology to be published in the hospital newsletter." He paused, eyes softening. "They recognize that your quick action saved Mr. Green's life, and they regret the way this was handled." Aisha felt her mouth go dry. She sat in stunned silence. In her mind, she replayed the past day's whirlwind. Claire's post, the petition, the board meeting. She remembered the fear she felt in HR, the weight of her grandmother's photo in her hand, the tender moments in the garden. Finally, she exhaled, tears of relief slipping down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, voice thick. Dr. Simmons nodded and left them to absorb the news. Behind her, Walter reached out and squeezed her hand. "I knew they would see the truth," he said, voice gentle. Claire and Mark hugged her, relief washing over their faces. Aisha looked around the garden at the faces of strangers turned friends, co-workers turned allies. She realized that saving one life had ripple effects she had never imagined. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Claire drove Aisha home. They talked quietly about what had happened, the lessons learned, and the changes ahead. At Aisha's apartment, they parted with promises to keep in touch. Claire held her hand a moment longer. "You gave me back my father," she said. "Thank you for everything." Aisha smiled, feeling the warmth of friendship and gratitude. He sighed. Aisha placed her grandmother's photo back on the shelf and sat down at her small desk. She opened her notebook and began to write. "Today I learned that one act of kindness can inspire a whole community." She wrote slowly, savoring each word. She thought of her grandmother's legacy, as a patient she would continue to serve, and the work she would do to make sure no other nurse felt punished for doing what was right. Before bed, she checked her email and found a message from the Nursing Association. They invited her to speak at a conference about her experience, to share how policy and compassion must balance in emergency care. She felt a spark of excitement. She replied that she would be honored. As she closed her laptop, she looked out the window at the stars glimmering above the city lights. Aisha lay in bed that night with her mind full of possibilities. She thought of tomorrow's shift, of the faces she would see in the ward, and of the advocacy work ahead. Her heart was full of hope, purpose, and a deeper understanding of her calling. She drifted to sleep with a sense of peace, knowing that what followed her firing had changed her life in ways she could never have predicted. She slept knowing that kindness, courage, and community could light even the darkest moments. Aisha woke before sunrise again, but this time her heart felt light. She stretched and slipped on the scrubs waiting on her bed. The hospital had sent her a new set marked Senior Nurse Thompson, and she pinned the badge to her chest with pride. As she left her apartment, she paused at the door and looked back at the photo of her grandmother on the shelf. She whispered, "This one's for you," and stepped into the morning air, ready for a new beginning. Arriving at Riverside, Aisha was greeted by warm smiles and soft nods from colleagues she had not yet met. Some whispered welcome back, while others quietly touched her arm in greeting. She felt their support like a gentle wave, and it steadied her. In the break room, a small cake waited on the table, decorated with the words, "Welcome home, Aisha." Balloons bobbed at the ceiling. She laughed, a bright sound that seemed to fill the room, and cut the first slice. As she tasted the sweet cake, she felt the kindness that had grown around her, bringing her back to this place she loved. Before her shift began, Aisha met with the nursing director in a private office. The director handed her a folder filled with papers outlining her new role. As a senior nurse, Aisha would oversee training for all new staff and lead an advocacy group for nurses facing unfair treatment. The hospital promised to support her work and give her the time and resources she needed. Aisha's eyes filled with gratitude. She had feared losing everything, but now she held an opportunity to help others. She told the director, "I will not let you down," and she meant it with all her heart. Out on the ward, Aisha's first task was simple but meaningful. Checking on Mr. Green, she pushed open the door to room 312 and found him sitting up eating breakfast. The smell of oatmeal and fresh fruit filled the air. When he saw her, he broke into a broad smile. "There she is," he said softly. She pulled a chair beside his bed and took his hand. "Thank you," he whispered. Aisha replied, "You did the hard work by fighting, Mr. Green. I'm just glad to see you well." They shared a quiet laugh and a moment of true friendship. Later, Aisha gathered nurses in the old conference room, now painted a soft green to welcome change. The table was surrounded by fresh flowers. Aisha stood at the head, her badge shining under the light. She began to speak about the new support network she would lead. She told stories of nurses who had felt alone, forced to choose between rules and caring. She said, "We will learn to speak up, to protect our patients and ourselves." Her voice was warm and strong. The nurses listened, their faces serious but hopeful. When she finished, they clapped softly, and some wiped tears from their eyes. Aisha felt a surge of purpose stronger than any fear she had known. Across town, the local news ran a longer feature on Aisha's advocacy. Cameras filmed her teaching a class of fresh nursing students. She showed them how to act calmly in emergencies, how to document every step, and how to communicate with supervisors. When seconds matter most, in simple words, she taught them that rules exist to guide us, but compassion guides our hearts. The students watched, eyes bright, nodding. Aisha's story reached other hospitals, and soon messages arrived from nurses in distant cities, thanking her and asking to join her network. Her quiet courage had become a spark for many. By the end of her first week back, Aisha felt the familiar ache in her feet from long hours on duty. Yet this ache was different. It was the ache of hard work and good purpose. Signs comforted an anxious patient and coached a new nurse on proper technique. She recalled the alarm in room 312, the rush of adrenaline, and the way defeat had felt when she left this place. Now, each prayer whispered at a bedside carried a promise. She would never let fear silence her. She would protect her patients and stand for her colleagues. One afternoon, Claire Green visited the hospital again, this time not with anger or fear, but with a bouquet of bright yellow daisies. She found Aisha in the garden clinic, checking paperwork on her tablet. Claire handed her the flowers and smiled. "These are for you," she said, for saving my father and for all you're doing for others." Aisha accepted the daisies and arranged them in a small vase on her desk. She told Claire that Walter was doing well, and together they talked about small joys like sitting in the sun, sharing stories, and looking forward to spring. Claire left with a wave, and Aisha watched her go, grateful for friendship born of crisis. As summer neared, Aisha organized the first meeting of her new support network in the hospital's lecture hall. The room filled quickly with nurses, doctors, and even a few administrators interested in seeing positive change. Aisha opened by thanking everyone for coming. She spoke of her grandmother's lessons that healing requires both skill and courage. She invited speakers who had faced similar challenges, and together they discussed ways to update policies to ensure that no nurse ever again felt punished for saving a life. After the meeting, a plan was drafted to review code procedures and communication lines. The energy in the room felt electric with hope. That evening, Aisha walked home under a sky painted orange and pink by the setting sun. She felt tired but happy. She thought of the path that had brought her here, the early mornings, the life and death moments, the pain of losing her job, and the joy of winning it back. She remembered her grandmother's porch and the stories woven there, stories of kindness and community. Aisha knew her own story had changed too. It was no longer just about being a nurse in a busy hospital. It was about using her voice, her heart, and her skills to make the world a better place. When she arrived at her apartment, she sat at her desk and opened her notebook. She wrote a final entry for tonight. Today we made a start. Tomorrow, we build on it. We will care with skill and stand with courage. She closed the notebook and turned off the lamp. As she lay down, she felt the gentle hum of purpose fill her chest. She closed her eyes and smiled, knowing that her life, like her calling, was richer and stronger than ever before.